Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into three of the most personal letters in the entire Bible, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Now, for centuries, they've been treated almost like a church rule book. But what if that's all wrong? What if we've been missing the real story? What if these aren't a handbook at all, but the last urgent words of a man on death row? The name we usually use for these letters, the Pastoral Epistles, well, that name was actually invented way back in 1703. And according to our source material today, that title isn't just a little bit off, it's fundamentally misleading. So that raises a pretty massive question, doesn't it? If we've been looking at these texts through the wrong lens for over 300 years, what have we been missing? What's the real story, the raw human drama that's been hiding in plain sight all this time? Okay, let's really get into this. To get our heads around this new perspective, we first have to understand the traditional view and all the problems that come with it. So on one hand, you have the common view. These letters are a pastor's handbook, a kind of tidy manual for organizing a church. But the argument we're exploring today paints a totally different picture. It says these are urgent, apostolic dispatches, think special mission briefings, sent to solve specific crises. The focus wasn't internal policies. It was the church's survival and its mission to the world. And this whole pastor's handbook theory, well, it's always created some pretty major historical puzzles. For one, the writing style and the vocabulary, they just feel different from Paul's other letters. And the travel plans he talks about, they just don't line up with the timeline in the book of Acts. These kinds of inconsistencies have fueled debates for centuries, with some scholars even questioning if Paul wrote them at all. But what if the key to solving this whole historical mystery isn't in the book of Acts at all? According to our source, the answer is found in what happened right after that book ends. So, the theory goes like this. Paul was actually released from that first Roman imprisonment we read about. He then spends a few more years traveling, which explains these new places like Crete. But then, he's betrayed, arrested a second time, and this time he's thrown into a death row cell. It's from that place, from that dark and final reality, that he writes these last letters. And this is the absolute game changer. It changes everything. He's not writing from a relatively comfortable house arrest anymore. He's an old man in a cold cell, condemned to die. That context explains the sudden shift in his tone, his focus, and his style. It solves the puzzle. So with that heavy new context in our minds, let's look at the guys he was writing to, Timothy and Titus, because this completely redefines who they were and what they were doing. See, they weren't being set up as permanent local pastors. Our source calls them apostolic delegates. Think of them as temporary troubleshooters, special envoys. Their job was to go in, fix a specific crisis, appoint local leaders to take over, and then get out. Paul's message was basically, finish this job and get to Rome as fast as you can. I need you. This slide just breaks it down perfectly. An apostolos or apostle was a pioneer, a sent one who was always on the move, planting new churches. But an episkopos or overseer was a resident. They were meant to stay in one place and manage the church that was already there. Timothy and Titus weren't residents, they were pioneers, acting as extensions of Paul himself. The letters also have these wildly different tones, and it's because Paul was writing to two totally different guys. You had Timothy, who Paul loved like a son, but who was often timid and needed a lot of encouragement. And then you had Titus. He was a tough, no-nonsense Gentile problem solver. Paul just had to point him at a problem, and he knew Titus would get it done. Which brings us to why these two very different men were sent out. It wasn't random. Each was sent to a unique location to solve a very, very specific crisis. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you see just how specific these missions were. This wasn't generic advice. These were tailored instructions. Timothy's job in Ephesus? Fix a huge problem with the quality of the leadership. Titus's mission in Crete? It was about the quality of the members themselves. Two different problems, two different solutions. And this really reveals Paul's core strategy at the end of his life. He wasn't chasing numbers. He wasn't focused on just getting more people in the door. He believed that if you get the quality right, quality leaders and quality members, then the health and the growth of the church would take care of itself. So when you put all of these pieces together, the death row cell, the temporary delegates, the targeted missions, the whole picture just snaps into focus. These letters stop looking like a corporate handbook and start looking like something so much more personal, so much more moving, an apostle's last will and testament. I mean, you can just feel the raw humanity in these lines. This isn't abstract theology. This is an old man shivering in a cold Roman prison, knowing his time is almost up, and he's just asking his friend, please bring me my coat before the winter hits. He absolutely knew his execution was coming. So this letter, it's not just advice, it's his final words. It's his last will and testament. It's him passing the baton to Timothy, the man he thought of as a son, charging him to carry the mission on after he was gone. And yet, in the face of all that darkness, his final message isn't despair. It's this breathtaking declaration of a life poured out, a race finished. It's a statement of just profound conviction and unshakable hope. Just incredible. So the big question, why does all of this really matter? Because, understanding this context isn't just some interesting historical tidbit. It really does change everything about how we read these letters. So let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways? Well, instead of a dry rulebook, we find this powerful, moving human drama. This isn't a manual. It's a story about legacy, about courage, and about a leader's last desperate attempt to make sure his life's work would outlive him. When you see it this way, the whole focus shifts, away from rigid institutional rules and toward the passionate heart of a mission being passed from one generation to the next. And that really leaves us with a final question to think about. How does reading these letters as an apostle's last will, and not a corporate handbook, change what they mean for us today?